Okay, evening. Good evening. Thank you for all coming. We should do some sort of fires. What's the evacuation? It's out there or this side, is that right? There's no fire alarm? No fire alarm?
Been waiting for this opportunity for years.
Come on, you did the fire alarm.
There are 2 exits. There is a double door at the side. If a fire alarm goes off, it's for real. Please exit this way, out through the double doors, and then at the muster point outside. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dennis.
Doors to automatic and cross-check.
Yes, he's been wanting to do that. It's his true vocation, I think, in life. Evening, I'm Stephen Gill. I'm the current president of the local ASHRAE UK Midlands section. What is that? ASHRAE, does anybody know what ASHRAE, apart from the ASHRAE members, anybody know what ASHRAE is? Good, well, thank you. Yes. ASHRAE was a society started, or is a society started in America back in the 1880 something, so it's been going on. It's been going an awful long time. We have recently started the first section in the UK, or group in the UK. It's a professional body really dealing with professionals working in the built environment. So it's not engineers, it is engineers, it can be anybody working in the built environment, including architects or consultants, anybody interested in that side of thing. And we started the UK section, which is, even after 100 years, it's the first group in the UK to set up less than a year ago. Tonight we have Eddie Murphy speaking, who's Vice President, and he looks nothing like he does in the films, I know.
That's my job.
Sorry, I told you so. Eddie was the Technical Director for McDonald until recently, and has now set up his own consultancy, Ollio Consultancy, doing built environment.
Well, effectively what you're going to see.
Please, yeah. There you go. Okay.
Just so I know the audience, you can hear me at the back, by the way. Okay. Just so I get a flavour for who's in the audience, how many have actually been involved in one way or another with the post-occupancy project so far? 2, 3. Okay, so I can pretty much say what the hell I like and I'll get away with it. So. Okay, so I'll have to do a bit of explaining then along the way of what it is that we're doing. Who cares? I mean, it's one of the things that I've always cared about, post-occupancy. Post-occupancy, the fact of, I've had this penchant for going back to buildings. So when I've done a design, sent it out to the world, went into the plant room, pressed the buttons, it's gone away, everything's worked perfectly, usually. Or not, as the case may be. Handed it over to the client, which is what the industry does. We hand our keys over to the client, and then we walk out the door, and we say, if you've got a problem in the next 12 months, give me a call. If you haven't, great. But then once the 12 months is over, that's your chance, you've lost it. And we never go back again to the building. The building then becomes the client, and they look after it to do what they want to do. I never felt comfortable that the industry actually does this. I actually think we should really be thinking a little bit more about what it is that we hand over, and be prepared to help that client to use that building and set it up the way that it needs to be set up. So that's what post-occupancy is effectively, all about. So for tonight, for this inaugural ASHRAE Midlands seminar, which I'm really pleased to do. So it's a kind of historic moment that we've got, folks, so you're part of it. I'm going to give you a little brief intro into POE. A little bit of a review of the work that I've been doing as technical director at McDonald, technical director there for 14 years. Before that, I was with Arab for 5 years before that. And believe it or not, I left Arab from White and Green, and then before White and Green I was actually back at McDonald. So it was a 30-year span working for big companies. And I've kind of given all of that up to kind of pursue this, and the paycheck as well, as it happens, to pursue this. So you might be able to tell me at the end of this whether I've done the right thing or not, and hopefully you agree it has been a good thing. But what it does show is I guess, is the immense passion that I've actually got in what it is that we're actually talking about tonight. So we'll have a talk on what I think all this means for the industry and have some conclusions later. A brief potted history. Who knows about Reba stages? So I think there's a few people. Well, you'll probably know they went from A, B, C, D, all the way up to L, back about 5 years ago. There used to be a Part M, which was all about feedback. So architects would design a building, do a commission for it, and then they would have this Part M at the end, which meant they would have to go back and look at the building. But apparently, so I've researched, in 1973 it was discarded, mainly because nobody was doing it, and B, because insurance companies apparently didn't like it either. So there were obviously uncovering difficulties in the building that the insurance industry itself didn't like. But in around 1985, it was picked up again by these guys, Bill Bordas and Adrian Lehman, in conjunction with a guy called Rod Bunn. And we have got somebody from Bisria, Rod works for Bisria. And they kind of started this thing which they call the probe studies, which were in-depth questionnaires around people who actually occupied buildings that they actually went back to. And the first buildings they actually went back to were Townfield House and the Elizabeth Fry building. And as a process of going back, they actually gathered a lot of data and then published it. And it was the first time that I'd actually ever seen anybody publish this sort of data. So I actually became pretty fascinated by it at that particular time. And then from that, there's this entity, this foundation called the Soft Landings Foundation, actually came into being in about the 1990, around that time. And this chap, Mark Ray, who was an architect at Ramjam, and it so happened that Mark and Bill Bordas, they knew each other pretty well because they used to work at the same company. So it's this collection of guys who thought, listen, we need to do more about going back and finding out what the hell's going on in our buildings after they've been handed over. So this is the Soft Landings Framework as it exists today. So I think that's the 2014 edition, which is BG 54. You won't be able to see that from the back of them. BG 54 2014. So you can download that, now. And inside of it, it will actually take you through all of the stages that you would need to do a soft landings or a post-occupancy evaluation of your project. And this is about instilling a quality system that ensures that the client is actually going to get, at the end of the day, what it is that they actually thought they were paying for at the beginning when they actually commissioned the project. So the first stage of that is what they call inception. And what that means is literally sitting down with your client and working out what it is that your client does, how they're likely to build a building, what types of spaces they're likely to want to have, how they're actually going to use it. And in the process of doing all of that, the architect and the rest of the design team build that into a brief that they then take and they develop the design on. And so when everybody's clear what it is that we're actually building, then we go into design development. And that proceeds pretty much as a normal design development might actually happen, but with greater attention to things like buildability and applying these performance outcomes that the client is actually looking for. So we're getting away from this idea that an architect or even an engineer for that matter can just dream up what we think fits best. We're actually talking about liaising with the client and making sure that what we design is what the client actually wants. And that building then, that design is actually buildable, that when we give it to the client, they will be able to accept it and look after it properly. So, in order to make sure that all of that happens, we have this next stage, which is the pre-handover stage. So, essentially, as we're coming close to handing over, we're actually checking all of the brief to make sure that it is actually what we're going to hand over is what we need. And that, checking all the operation and maintenance manuals, we're checking all the commissioning information, all of these things that are needed to make sure that we get a safe and smooth transition between the construction phase and the operation phase. And then we go into the operation, or the post-operation phase. And this is about the design team not just giving the keys over and saying, ta-da, I'll see you in a year. It is actually about the design team saying, well, okay, for the first six weeks, 9 weeks, we'll actually sit with you and we'll make sure that everything that we said was going to happen is happening. Everything that's supposed to happen is actually happening. And that you, Mr. Client, you've got a soft landing. So this is where the term comes from. You've actually got a soft landing. So we will actually take you by the hand and we'll lead you through how to actually look after your plant, how to run the plant, iron out all those teething issues that you're likely to have in those first initial weeks, and make sure all of this comes together pretty well. So all of that is, well, sometimes it gets done, sometimes it doesn't get done. But now it's mandatory in government. Government actually got government soft landings, where actually government now are mandating that we follow this entire process. But the phase that's always interested me more than any other is this aftercare phase, where we actually say, well, okay, now, Mr. Client, it's a year gone past, we're back, and we want to find out how things are from here on out. And what usually happens in that phase is we don't just look at the client, but we look at the people who's actually working in the building, so the client's employees, or people who are associated with the sort of day-to-day use of the building. And I mean, I suppose this takes the form, if you like, of the main part of it being the bus survey. So I would have, it's not recommended that you do it, less than a year afterwards, because the building is so new that people just sort of think, oh, this is a fabulous space, it's absolutely brilliant, so everything will be brilliant on the form. Bus recommend, or soft landings recommend, that you do it at least a year afterwards. I've seen research that says that actually people are influenced to be positive about a building 9 months before they actually move in, and up to 2 years after they've actually moved in. So there's actually almost a 3-year window, a year of it before you hand over and 2 years after you hand over, where the newness of the building will actually influence the results that you're actually getting. So I would always recommend that that's at least 2 years. You could probably soft test it, a year in. But if you're really looking for the accurate data about the building, then it's probably 2 years. And then after that, continue on intervals as you see fit. So, but what this does, it gives you this thing which we call user satisfaction quotient. So it's a number, it's a ratio that tells you how satisfied the general population are with the building as it stands. So I stayed on that quite a while because of it, just for the audience sake. So Pro Study was developed, as I say, back in '85 by Bill Borderson and Adrian Lehman. Their take on it was really to provide, sorry about the spelling, but it's a critique of poor design protocol. They looked for these things called tail wagging dogs. So essentially, an example of that might be, okay, we've got a room in here full of 30, 40 people, but the temperature probe that's actually controlling the heating in here is actually in a common space outside. So we've actually got, the tail is the temperature probe outside, wagging the dog, which is in the room here. So that's not outside, it's not going to control what's happening in here. So gradually it will be feeling nice and comfy, whereas actually we're starting to boil because we're all a bit squashed in, as it were. So Bill was looking for these things where designers were making the kind of errors that they would error because they didn't really know how the building was actually going to be used. And boy did he find them. He found absolutely what we were delivering absolutely riddled with these sorts of basic misunderstandings between what designers thought was going to happen and what actually happened in practice. So these are kind of some of the things. I mean, he used to sort of issue these. So all of this to me is in the spirit of Part M. It's feedback. It's actually looking at, this is what happened. None of it's actually preemptive from the point of view that this was going to happen anyway, because people didn't know it was going to happen. So you can see this is kind of just more of, I suppose, Bill's thinking, insofar as that he wanted to understand what the positives were, he wanted to understand what the negatives were, and by understanding what the negatives, you could have a diagnosis which could correct it, and then if you understood what the positives were, you could have advocacy, which would then mean that spread that out to the rest of the world. So this is good practice, that's bad practice, please industry, stop doing this, and please do more of this. So that was his rationale. It was kind of from the point of view of informing the industry of where the problems were, rather than necessarily that job being able to be improved because it's already too late, the things that actually been done. Sorry about this prezi here of some slightly unbalanced disposition. There's not too much of it. So it wouldn't be right to not talk about ASHRAE and see what ASHRAE are actually doing with regards to post-occupancy valuation. And it seems it's probably only recently that they've kind of jumped into the fray, as it were. But in actually doing it, they've produced what's called the Performance Measuring Protocols for Commercial Buildings, what they call PMP. So actually, we do like our acronyms. But this has actually been partially devised by CPD and US GBC, US Green Building Council, who are the people who do the leaders of environmental design. So effectively, they're the people who do the BREEAM for the USA. Howell Davies, who's a member of our group, was actually the guy who was involved in helping to do this. I guess rather very American. It's very pragmatic in how it's actually pulled together. It's taken a totally different stance to the soft landing stance. They've actually divided the protocol into objectives, metrics, and benchmarks. So essentially, you go to the client and you set what your objectives are. And your objectives can be basic, intermediate, or advanced. So straight away, you can see that it's pragmatic from the point of view of trying to entice clients to do something that they can afford to do. At least do something that you can afford to do, even if you can't do the whole hog, as it were. And then they grouped these objective metrics and benchmarks into the themes, which are energy use, water use, indoor environmental quality and thermal, indoor environmental quality, air quality, and indoor environmental quality on lighting and daylight quality. And then there's the last one then, acoustics. So they've touched all of the major technical parameters that we as building services practitioners would tend to be interested in, split it into whether or not you want to do basic, intermediate or advanced. And then you talk with the client to set objectives, you work out what those metrics would be to set those objectives. Then from that you work out benchmarks that you compare yourself to as you're going forward. So it's no two buildings will effectively be comparing themselves against the same thing. Now what ASHRAE could have done is they could have gone to Carnegie Mellon University, because Carnegie have actually been involved with setting up a post-occupancy evaluation standard for the whole of American government, which this organisation here, the General Service Administration, is effectively their sort of cabinet office, if you like. And they've actually developed this assessment method called NEAT, which is the National Environmental Assessment Toolkit. And so they kind of divide things into technical metrics, which are all these kind of things, around here, so CO2, relative humidity, temperature at 2 feet, temperature at 4 feet. And essentially you take loads of measurements in various parts of the building and you decide what percentage of them were within range and what percentage were out of range. And that's what gives you this spider diagram. And the object being that you try to get the thing as wide as you possibly can in terms of the spider. And then you can do the same again when it comes to the comfort metrics, which are things like quality of lighting, meant of light for computers. So these are things that users would actually be interested in. So we're actually starting to see that there's some cognizance being taken of what users, real users, actually think about what's going on. So now that kind of made me wonder, well, why did ASHRAE? Well, I can kind of see why it is, and it's really because of the costs, because I can see that some clients might not be able to afford to go through that whole process in order to get to something. So ASHRAE thought, well, let's do something that at least people can do that might be a bit more practical. So that's the explanation of what POE. Now it's just, let alone me, going back to buildings and what I sort of make of all of this. And for me, this is not absolutely where it all started. It started probably 5 years before that, and maybe even 10 years before that, because I've always gone back to buildings. But I actually did a study of a building in Sheffield called Vulcan House, which was the first BREEAM Excellent building in Sheffield. And I had Sheffield University involved with that, but it wasn't a formal soft landing study. It was used as a PhD, but a lot of the data that came from that actually ended up being very coincidental to the data that we're actually going to see on this now. So 2 St Paul's Place was constructed in 2007 by a speculative developer. In 2009 we were just asked to fit it out, actually. So the DFE, the Department for Education, purchased it in March 2009, and then we fitted it out. We did all the design to move things around, and we made it more energy efficient, and we increased the BREEAM rating from very good as it was in its base load up to BREEAM Excellent in its fully fitted out mode. And then the client moved in 2010. And that's kind of what it looked like when we got hold of it. So they wanted to install all this sort of kit and caboodle here, so we put 580 workstations in, put 126 PV panels on the roof, put rainwater in, standby generator, put a data centre into it, a kitchen, and the most important thing of all for me was these 52 energy meters. So I wanted to find out what those 52 energy meters did, and I wanted to compare them against what we'd actually predicted they should do. So we were able to enter this in for the Innovate UK TSB Building Performance Evaluation, where I think there are something like 48 buildings in this call-off for this piece of work that's been done by TSB. They've published quite a lot of information about the buildings that are participated in it, but so far 2 St Paul's Place has not been published just yet. I'm not quite sure why that is, but all of the data that we did publish is intact and has been verified. So, so I guess this is the bit that I was kind of more interested in doing, is to try and, we kind of did this model, I think John will recognise these things as being Energy Plus, and we were able to split the thing out into, compare it with benchmarks. So this is what the building we thought it would actually do. This is what I think TN22 thought it should do, and this is what typical Econ 19 thought it should do. So when it came down to actually measuring it, we're actually 14% lower than the target that we set for ourselves. We actually got a deck of rating of 89, which were for a 4-pipe fan coil building. Turned out to be the lowest energy, fully air-conditioned building on the government estate. I'm not sure where that sits actually in the UK as a whole. So we're at D at 89 as measured. And then we did some interventions that actually came through the research. We actually lowered that by 27% further, and the whole process of doing that meant that the building won the Building Performance Award 2013 for best operational building, which effectively is the blue ribbon for that particular set of awards. So inside of all of that, we did the bus questionnaire. They came up with things like, well, okay, you haven't got enough meeting rooms, Environmental comfort was okay generally, but problematic in some areas. And from a design perspective, the users liked the vibrant interior, and the location being in the city centre of Sheffield was a big plus for it. But then, in the part of the bus, it gives you this user satisfaction summary. And these are all of the other 300 odd office buildings that have gone through this same questionnaire. And so you were able to rate ourselves in comparison to all of those. And we were on the 68th percentile. So essentially there were 32% of buildings that were better than our buildings. And I thought, I couldn't believe it actually. I was flabbergasted. That my precious building that won all these awards, that was BREEAM excellent, that was fantastic to walk around, all that kind of thing, and could be rated by the people who are actually using it on a day-to-day basis. A third of them thought, actually, there's something amiss, with the building. So, for me, rather than sort of take it all to heart, I thought, well, it kind of, points to a lack of understanding, because I don't physically know what I would have needed to have done better to have that building have 90 or 95% of people say, this is a fantastic building. So I was interested in that as a question. What do you need to do to actually make sure that everybody in the building thinks it's brilliant? So is it just more than environmental comfort? Is it better? Is it more than good, good interior design? But clearly, for me, there was a gap in what the best, and this was the best, I think. It's a category A, Class A building. It's the best that the industry can provide. And something is wrong if we can't actually think that most of the people who actually use it. And you would need to see some of the comments that actually come back. There were comments coming back saying, blow it up and knock it down. There was literally stuff like that coming back. So I felt a bit better. Well, actually, with some research that was done in Australia as well, that kind of confirmed, some of the stuff that we were thinking. But I certainly, thought, this is the sort of thing that we know is out there, at the minute. And the BCO just last July confirmed that the property sector, after a big survey that they'd actually done amongst, I think something over 300 respondents, of their people who are close to BCO being the British Council of Officers, Council for Officers. So these are people who own property, own office property, surveying all these people who own this property and thinking, yes, there is a lag between what we actually provide as a property industry and what you actually give us. So there is some shortcomings in occupier satisfaction levels with what we're actually delivering currently. So, despite all of this, our best endeavours, there is this deeper misunderstanding, if you like, and there needs to be a greater understanding for us in how to generate a great user experience. So this, for me, is the holy grail, as far as I'm concerned. I actually went back and just started looking at see what research is out there already. So I just did a kind of a desktop study on research that's already out there, and I came across this chap here. He's a Canadian chap, Newsham, and this really sort of floated my boat, if you like, when he said that most commonly surveyed parameters of all post-occupancy evaluation tend to be the perception of environmental comfort and the degree over environmental comfort. There's precious little that actually looks at what users think. What user satisfaction is most client, and this is Newsham again, feelings of increased productivity. So if the building actually helps us to do our job better, then we might feel better about it. Feelings of better well-being. If the building actually helps us to feel well, in what it is we're doing. We're all pretty stressed in these environments that we actually create ourselves. So if we had a building that actually helped us to feel a little bit better. And buildings that where the facilities, our ability to do what we need to do and having all those facilities available to us. So I kind of thought, well, why doesn't post-occupancy evaluation measure this? because evidently this is what our customers are interested in. They're not interested in whether, you know, the lighting's too bright or too dim, or the heating's too, you know, too hot or too cold. Okay, they are, but this is what they're more interested in. And current survey methods fail to properly address this. So, and amongst all of this, I knew as well that you know, there's something about the population that you're actually surveying, and there's actually something about the survey form that you're actually using to survey as well. We're surveying different organisational cultures. In the Home Office, I was surveying people who were literally dragged off the dole queue, stuck behind a desk for 8 hours a day, and told to process passports, and they were being compared with how many they processed. So Johnny was being compared with, you know, Maureen, as to exactly how many they got through in a day. So the pressure was immense on them in terms of if they didn't get the quota that they actually needed to. Whereas in the Department for Education, these were executives who were flying up and down to London, meeting cabinet ministers, got degrees and all that kind of stuff. Completely different types of people. And our survey form doesn't take into account the level of education of the people who's actually completing the thing. So there's the type of work, and then the other thing that we always fail at, you know, as architects and engineers, we always tell our client how great the new building's going to be. And we did that twice in a row, Vulcan House and Department for Education. And then when they get it, they think, yeah, it's all right, but yeah, it's not as good as you said it was going to be. So we need to be careful about, you know, this thing about how we inform users about what it is they're going to get. So, taking all of that, and you kind of look then, what do users, you know, really want? And you kind of think, well, what is the psyche? What's the sociology, you know, of the user? And this guy, I think, has got some sort of handle on it, insofar as how he runs his business. He says, my clients don't come first. The people who work for me come first. They're the most important. Because if you take care of them, they'll take care of your clients. So instantly, we're actually starting to see a guy who thinks, these are the guys who make me money. I want to look after them, and I need to look after them a bit better, you know, than a normal firm. Because then they'll stay with me longer, they'll do more for me, they'll jump cartwheels, they'll do all that sort of stuff. And it's right, because employee engagement is actually a valuable commodity. And the building actually contributes to that engagement. So if you have engagement, it's been well researched that engagement or the lack of it is a significant contributor to, or impediment to business profitability. And all of the human factor sciences say that high engagement, well-being, and staff empowerment, these are the three things that we need to have. So we're in a position as building technologists, if you like, to provide, you know, at least those top two by virtue of the fact that we're providing a building, an environment for it to actually happen in. If you don't realise how important engagement is, these are kind of screenshots that I've taken off another presentation, but the average company in the UK will have 31% of people who will be fully disengaged. There will be a few people, well, more than 50% who are not engaged. And then these are normally the bosses, 21% fully engaged. So if you're not a boss, the likelihood is, you know, that you're going to be disengaged by one factor or another. Who do we ask when it comes to what we want out of a building? We ask this lot. We never ask this lot. More research done in the States, by increasing the engagement factor by 10%. So you get 10% people more engaged. You increase, and it's been shown, proven, you increase your profitability by 22%. You increase your productivity by 21%. Absenteeism, churn, both go down. So you can see, you know, actually, we can mess about with heating and energy and all that kind of stuff. But the power we've actually got to influence this and connect that to clients actually becomes very potent and deep. So it didn't seem, now I've yet to actually, I want to do some research to connect these two things. But this is the pie chart from Vulcan House, actually, which we did twice, repeated it twice. Well, actually we did it 3 times. We did it a year before they moved in, we did it a year after they moved in, and then we did it 2 years after they moved in. And this is the one for 2 years after, which effectively showed, you know, how many people were very satisfied with the building to very unsatisfied with the building, moving all the way around. And it so happens that that same percentage of people, the normal in the population of people who are fully engaged, is very similar to the number of people who are very satisfied with the building. And the number of people who are fully disengaged in the normal population are the number of people who were very unsatisfied with the building. And I'm kind of thinking, well, hang on a minute. When we're doing all these probe studies and we're running them out, are we really measuring about the building? Or actually measuring the general engagement level of the organisation that are actually doing the survey in? Bit of a note, you know, for Borders and Lehman to take on board. But something that I've spoken to Adrian Lehman about this, and he did in fairness say, listen, if I had another 30 years to do all this again, I'll be doing exactly the same sort of things that you were doing. But this information just wasn't available to us when we did that, and all we wanted to do was improve it. And I think that's absolutely fair comment. So there's a medical term called etiology. And I wondered whether this was our etiology, which is a definite sort of etiology in medical terms is the science of causation, the full understanding of everything and how they connect. So I think as an industry we need to get to that understanding, that full understanding. We're not just dealing with technical kind of things, you know, the bricks and mortar of it. We need to understand the social side of it, the sociology of work, and how what we deliver to people to work in actually work together. So on a scientific basis, you know, we now know that users, you know, they don't like the buildings that we give them because we don't engage them in their design. We don't design with them in mind, and they actually feel completely disengaged from what it is that we're actually doing. So it's that word engagement again. So if you're not engaged at work, you know, you're not going to care about the place. And certainly if you're not engaged in design, you're certainly not going to care about what people deliver to you. So you need to find a way to bridge that gap. So, and it's so easy to do, because all you have to do is do it in a way in which people, you ask people questions, they will actually do it. And this is an engagement company who are involved in trying to get a better place in a London district. So in finding, engaging users, finding out what the building can do for them, how the buildings create opportunities for specific social dynamics and for improved, you know, performance and behaviour. So these are things that we've never tapped into before, and which we really do need to find a way to do. So for me, I think we really need to have a look at REBA Stage 0, which is now we're, instead of using letters, we're now using numbers to go into BIM world, into building information modelling. So the latest 2013 edition of REBA has changed from using letters to now using numbers. And it goes from 0 up to 7. And 0 was not going to be included. 0 was actually asked for by government. Government wanted 0 included. Because they felt there needs to be a place, you know, before the design started, where the client could actually assemble the brief and assemble it properly. But in doing that, I don't think they ever meant that actually this is the sort of thing that should happen. So that we actually make, you know, what we're actually doing more engaging to the people who are actually going to use the building at the end of the day. That we enable them to participate, to have and take ownership, and to inform the final outcome. Because if you can actually help people to feel that they've actually done something that actually the building is, this room is like this because I helped to design the light, or I helped to design, you know, the track, you know, whatever it happens to be. When people come in and they're normal users and they've helped to form that space in some place or another, collectively, as a group, individually, and they will actually feel that it's partly theirs. And because it's partly theirs, they'll engage with it. So it's about designing and helping to design something that's got purpose and something that's got understanding. So I took this quote here from Frank Duffy, who was writing in Bennett Associates yearbook for Rab Bennett, who was another one of the guys who actually started the soft landings. And we've kind of got to just resist the tendency to conjure an image or a concept, without thoroughly understanding what the client's problems are, because that's what makes good architecture, not. So my own kind of strategy then for all of this might be that we kind of need to really understand the culture of the organisation, feed that into a pre- and post-occupancy evaluation, understand how we actually get well-being as a feature of buildings, so that well-being reinforces people's engagement of the fact they think that the building is actually being built for them and not for the corporate organisation. That then starts to feed in some of these other really interesting things that I think buildings actually need to start to consider as well. One of them being the Well-Built Standard, which is a World Green Building Council standard. And you can see from that, we're starting to see POE concepts in there, in terms of mind, comfort, fitness, light. These are things that could well be the subject of post-occupancy or pre-occupancy evaluation. And then one of the things that I kind of think is really interesting, again started up in the States, this guy, Edward O. Wilson, defines this term called biophilia, which is actually, well, I suppose it really means the Latin love of nature, or love of the biosphere. And he's kind of the view, and it's been picked up by a consultancy called Terrapin Green, Bright Green, and it's about the power and the influence of natural daylighting, nature, and water inside those spaces. So having internal spaces that echo the quality of external spaces, and all of this. I think the thing that engages people, if you like, in these sort of things, is the continual change. It's never boring. It always looks different. It always feels different. Where you're able to manage these things from an architectural standpoint. So what does all this mean? Well, users don't just love buildings because the temperature's great, or they're low carbon, or they're environmentally acceptable. They think that's a nice tick in the box, but it's not what excites them. Users love buildings because we design them to be great to work in, to be great to use, and also because they were included in the conception of it. So they actually are part of the success story. And it's an absolute fact. If you can actually get people to love the building they're in, then you will actually get them to forgive that building any of its transgressions. So the temperature can be set at 28 degrees, and because they've helped to design it, they will not complain about it. Or it can, so they will. There's a bigger threshold of control that you can actually put over the building itself, and that in itself is more sustainable. As all these other kind of things as well. There's a housing scheme in South Wales that's got 100% satisfaction rate. It uses ordinary insulation because they couldn't afford to do it. It's built to ordinary standards, but the energy rating of it is actually better than BedSet. And the post-occupancy people evaluation, going back to it, couldn't believe it. They actually took the meters out to have them checked because they couldn't believe the meters were so long, but they were okay. And they went back, and it turned out people were wearing gillets, turned the temperature down, and they loved where they were living because they helped to design it. And because they helped to design it, and they wanted a low energy community to begin with. And so in order to give themselves a low energy community that they designed, they operated it in a way that actually was low energy. So this is the bit that ASHRAE don't like. So for my business, what I'm hoping to do as part of Ollio, which is why I've given up my big paycheck. I think this deserves a shot. The property industry needs to get itself on board with these sorts of issues, and I think there's a business in it, which is why, from my perspective, I want to be able to offer, to the property industry, buildings that have actually got fully engaged users, that help people in them to be more productive, that help them to be more happier and more content, and just to effectively love the buildings that they've got in a better way. So, who cares?
Thank you.
I think we'll all agree that it's a fascinating topic. I think we all live in and work in buildings. What amazing. This is question and answer time. So if anybody would like to kick us off with a question, must have some questions somewhere.
It's all well and good, but what happens when it's not owner occupiers? So when someone builds a building to purely make money, when they don't particularly care about the well-being of individuals, they just want to build it for as cheap as possible, sell it for as much as possible.
Well, we do need to, there are people like that, but those buildings that I've shown you there, they're effectively speculative buildings. But there is a movement, particularly after the crash that we just had, where a hell of a lot of toxic acids. If buildings actually display these sorts of qualities, where people want to stay in them, they will actually stay in them for longer. So effectively the rental yield is actually that much more secure, less risky. So I'm actually talking to developers who are actually interested in building like this and finding clients, because nowadays anyway, it's very difficult to actually, a developer's not going to build a building off spec, and just put it on the market and just wait for it to go. He wants to find a client first they can actually pair with it. So I'm talking to developers and saying, listen, I can give you the capability to do something like this with a client that you're interested in working with. And there are, yours is the generation now who actually don't really want to be, sitting in an office, 9 to 5 and, sitting on a desk all day long. So this post-millennial generation, where you can work anywhere, anytime, do anything. So offices in particular have got to do different things for different people. So they are actually changing more rapidly as well, and how they're actually being used is changing more rapidly. And that's actually more all the reason for actually connecting to the people who are actually going to use them, to find out exactly how they're going to use them, what they want, what kind of space they want. So I can actually use that then to connect to developers and say, listen, we can go to a client and find out what the client is really able to do with the property space, how they actually need to build it, and it's going to be built in a little bit better way and a little bit more bespoke to their actual need. So this is about actually connecting, not just talking to top tier clients, but actually talking to people who actually work underneath the headline clients, as it were. So it's never actually been done before, and I do think developers now are waking up to it. The other thing is as well as there's an organisation called GRASP who are looking at certainly interested in well-being, certainly interested in sustainability as ways to actually help portfolio owners. So these are the people who own the pension schemes and stuff like that. That they too can actually they're actually portfolios. They're interested in effectively not having the same thing happen that happened in 2008, whereby a load of property gets written off because there's just no use anymore. So they want to make sure that if they are going to invest in property, that it is actually going to be de-risked as far as it can possibly be de-risked, and that it's got a connection back to people who are going to want to use it on a continuous basis. So your question is valid, absolutely valid, and there will still be developers who will not want to touch this with a large part.
Well, ultimately, quite crudely, there's two types of developers. Yes. There's the merchant developer and there's an investment developer. Mm-hmm. And this type of thing is obviously angled towards the investment developer. So the developers like Durant London, Stanhope, that I've worked with in the past, who do lots of POEs. Durant does a project called White Collar Factory, which I don't know if you're aware of, which is through AHMN, and they're looking at performance in all these different facets. But I think ultimately what's interesting is that, you know, it's about user education and trying to not only engagement but educating them. Ron Germain from Stanhope will constantly say, I went in there and told them 100 times about these vents and not to put their desk directly over the vents. And as soon as he goes in there, half the people have their desk over the vents and complaining about the temperature. And it's, you know, how do you sort of mitigate that?
Well, I mean, I think that as far as the technical side of things is concerned,
well, it's not. I don't think it's technical. I think it's a cultural, organizational culture about behaviours and user education.
Well, you know, we do, and it seems. I mean, I don't know why we've not actually made this connection before. You know, between how people use buildings and how you actually design. And it's, you know, ultimately none of this is rocket science. You know, but I've not actually found. I've been looking at drawing. There are very few people who are actually making this connection. You know, between, you know. I mean, I'd really love to validate that thing between engagement and, you know, people dissatisfied with buildings, because I think there's a real and valid connection there, and there's also an opportunity in it for us to actually design buildings and hand them over to clients, where we're actually increasing the engagement. And if we can and validate, you know, that, then that of itself then opens up a world of possibilities for us to actually become, I suppose, reinforcers of the profitability of the buildings and the organisations that are actually, you know, sitting inside them.
The gentleman in the back, sorry, Dennis, you first, and Dennis.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm just wondering, because you didn't mention the cost involved in this. So who bears the cost? Is it part of the contract or the client, or is it part of the CSR from the company?
Well, that for me is part of the thing that's always been a thing. POE as an entity has never been paid for, because clients always expect that, you know, when they commission a building, they expect it to be perfect when it's handed over. They don't expect any defect. They want 0 defects, and it never gets done because nobody wants to pay for the full post-occupancy evaluation, the full soft landings. And we've got to the situation now where government having to mandate it so that it is actually paid for. Now, if you actually take the scenario that I'm trying to explain here, in order, I've done some calculation, rough calculation. In order to build a building and provide a desk for somebody, you know, to work at on an annual basis, it would cost around about £90 per square foot per annum, you know, in terms of paying a mortgage, paying, you know, the ownership costs for that person to be able to sit at that desk in the UK outside of London. In order, that person who's actually sitting there will actually cost the organisation and contribute to its profitability £900 per square foot. So to increase their engagement, their profitability by 10% and get that 22% in the profit on the bottom line, which is around about £1 million per 100 employees. You can see that, you know, this kind of thing not only does it pay for itself, it absolutely pushes anything that you could possibly do by way of energy saving or, you know, any of that kind of stuff. So it's an investment that has to be made, but it's an investment that very quickly recovers its cost. And I haven't met anybody who thought, well, if I can recover my cost in a very short period of time, it's not something that I will do. So, you know, I've been pretty used to getting clients to make a much bigger investment to get, you know, savings in sustainability or savings in carbon by virtue of a 7-year or 8-year payback. So this is kind of, we're talking about 6 months potentially. As an impact.
Yeah, we always place a lot of focus about refurbishing buildings, a big stock. What can we do to make them more energy efficient? We refit them with insulation and all kinds of technologies. Eddie, how far do you think we might get with the concept of refurbishing the occupants of the buildings to change their perception of the building they're in? What scope have we got to If you start with a new building, plenty of scope. If it's a refurbishment, you've got lots of TLC on the occupants. How far do you think we might take that?
I actually think it doesn't matter what you do to the inside of the building. So we all think, well, you know, we'd have to probably give them the state-of-the-art, spaces to break out into, or a state-of-the-art kitchen, or TV that pops up, or whatever. None of that is actually important. The sociology of this, or the psychology of this, is that you've just asked them the question. You've involved them. So they could ask for, and the other thing is, the terms that you're involved in have got to be, you own the budget and you own the programme. So we're involving you, but you also own the budget and you also own the programme. That's part of the deal of you being involved. After that, so if you say, well, okay, we've got £1 million to spend, what do you want to do with it? So it could be refurbish the office, or it could be have a new office, or it could be a combination of a refurb and a bit of, none of that actually really matters. What really matters is you just involve them. And the fact that you actually involved them, gained ownership, then after that they will do whatever they have to do. So it's the involvement in engagement that's actually the important thing. So after that, it really doesn't matter whether it's new build or refurb. We're working with them.
You want to ask you a question? Yes, sir.
Yeah. What's the momentum for this integrated, user-driven approach in the industry? The reason I'm asking is because when I was a student, not so very long ago, well actually quite a long time ago, the industry was trying to break down the silos of architect, design the building, AR, building services, plumber, fit the systems to it. So, I'm an academic. My perception of partly what's broken that down is the importance of energy and the fact that you've got to consider a more integrated approach to design, and that's what's driven the momentum. So what's going to drive, my question really is what's going to drive, or what is driving the real momentum for this kind of approach?
Well, I mean, a lot of the thinking, that I've been, the research that I've actually followed up on, most of it has been done in the States. And I've actually made LinkedIn. It's a great thing with LinkedIn. You can connect to people, and I've connected to people in JLL, Jonathan Langlassau, and for Lend-Lease, in the States, a really fantastic lady called Kay Sargent, and they're actually promoting this pretty heavily. So particularly at these kind of property agent, kind of levels. So it's the bit that the people that clients come to first before the architect, and they've got people who are interested in what's called human factors. So these are the people who actually help you to get your human capital as best as it can possibly be, and they're connecting that to spaces to help that human capital to be. So maybe typically America is leading the way, all of this. But it is little by little drip feeding. And I think the well-built, that standard coming to Arabs, that's part of it. Biophilia is kind of making its way here. But I don't know of anybody else, in the UK at the minute who's doing this. But what I do know is that these property agents who are, the entities, the UK entities of these American corporates, they are particularly interested to talk to me as somebody who can talk the same language that we're actually hearing being talked in the States.
I think you said earlier government jobs have got to have this perspective,
Yes.
haven't they?
Yes.
So
Well,
that was one of the things that helped Bill along the way, wasn't it? That if you wanted a government job, you had to be fully...
essentially, that's. I mean, governments have got a real problem currently with engagement. At the moment, they're following what's called this the way we work program. So essentially, government are saying, listen, we're going to slash the amount of property that we own by 50%. We're going to get out of all of these old buildings. We're going to go into brand new buildings that are much easier to run, and all that kind of stuff. And 50% of people are going to work in what's called spaceless office, i.e. at home, using technology to connect directly into the space. So, but they've pretty much been compelled to do it. You know, so they're not actually being engaged. You know, and so they're going to see these buildings that have been moved into as part of that reason for further disengagement, because they're not done properly. So naturally, I've tried to input in on the back of all of that, which is what I'm doing at the moment.
Okay.
You talked about user engagement, but you didn't talk about developer engagement. I was involved in a project where the user was engaged with the developer. The developer then went and did a very bad job, and the user ended up undoing the bad things the developer did. I'm also aware that in motor industry, there's a company that is developing a concept car and a concept business model, where they are never going to sell a car that they develop, they're just going to sell transportation service. I'm just wondering whether we can turn this model upside down on its head and try to change the way how developers develop, so that they never end up to hand over a building, they own the building, and if users are not happy with the building, the developer is not going to make money.
Well, my own I understand where you're coming from with that, but ultimately developers depend on clients. They will not develop unless they've actually got a tenant for the building. It's just not going to happen. So, I'm thinking my methodology is useful to developers because it gives them access to go to a client and say, listen, we've got this, and it will hopefully help you to get to a better building, one that you. But I would rather just go directly to clients, So ultimately, developers will do what clients want, and up until now, clients have never been knowledgeable enough to really understand what it is that they actually want. Which, part of what I'm actually involved with now is actually trying to understand how do we actually go directly into client organisations and actually help them to understand. So part of what I'm doing at the minute is to try to get clients to understand what they don't want, and sometimes they actually have to see what they don't want before they actually know what they want. So it's how you actually do that. And part of it will be around using BIM earlier, visualization tools, 3D models, these kind of things. So these are things. So if you get an architect in a room, with a client early doors, then they can actually start to test day in the life scenarios of their organisations and people, and what they do and how they do it, and understand what makes their business tick and how all of that sort of fits together, so that the business actually can understand where it's not functioning properly now because of its property, and how the new brief might actually inform that. So effectively all of that takes that out of the developer's arena anyway. So I'm kind of more interested in getting to clients who are knowledgeable clients, who understand property, understand what it. I mean, I dare say universities would be absolutely prime candidates for that, because these are clients who actually need to attract, the right sort of people, to make sure that they exist and continue to exist. In competition.
I think there's a key issue with developer disengagement in terms of quality of workforce and workmanship, and I think something needs to perhaps be done from both sides to get that.
I don't dismiss what you're saying, and invariably, if you actually got clients who are more knowledgeable, doing inspections and site inspections and stuff like that, you'd actually probably see that the quality of things, because there'd be more pairs of eyes looking at stuff and how it's actually been, and it's not how I actually thought it was going to be, and it's not what we agreed. You would have a much more knowledgeable client by virtue of the process, and that would actually help, improve the quality of what developers are doing.
And there was somebody down here had the hand up earlier. Oh, okay. Yeah.
If a building gets a very poor review, so who's to be blamed? Who shares more part of the blame? Is it contractor or the designer?
Sorry, just repeat that again.
if a building gets a very poor review,
Yeah.
so who's to be blamed, like a designer or contractor? Because if the design, usually the thing is like on the last point, the building is not actually built as per design.
Mhm.
There are few changes, and if there are problems due to workmanship or etc.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I mean, essentially now the industry is predicated on a very legal construct, insofar as that we produce a brief, from that we produce a specification, and we go through stages, you know, from 0, 1, 2, 3. At every stage there's a sign-off, and that sign-off is signed off by the client, so the client is happy with what's been produced so far. And by the end of it all, there's, you know, before we actually go to build anything, there's a contract that's signed that says these are the drawings, this is the specification, this is the contract. Now Mr. Contractor, build it. And if the contractor doesn't build it exactly like that, then an inspection at the end of the project will actually say, well, this is not like that, you need to fix that. So it's all done around the contract. It's not actually done around what the client. So things could have gone wrong as far as the client was concerned, and not been aware of it. And he could be looking at getting a building that he is not aware is not going to suit his needs, because he's not really investigated properly, you know, at that stage 0 part, what it is that he really wants, what it is that he really needs, and put the effort into actually making sure that he really is going to get something that actually makes his business better. But the industry, it says right and wrong is based on what's delivered in the contract, and that's how the arbitration is made.
Right, I think we're actually running out of time, as you've generated a lot of questions. We will be running this as a webinar as well. If you're a glutton for punishment or really interested, you'll be able to, we don't have the details yet, but Eddie will be doing all this again and perhaps with a few tweaks. So if you have any more questions, please send them or see Eddie afterwards, or email him, that'd be great. So if you join me now in just thanking Eddie the usual way. Announcement, ASHRAE UK, we've got another seminar in June at Birmingham University on low carbon district heating, low carbon district heating, using heat pumps from rivers. If you want to attend in Birmingham, that's June 14th. And we will be back here again after the summer. I don't know when it will be, with another presentation. If you're interested in ASHRAE student membership, Malcolm, I think, has already spoken to a few, but by all means speak to Malcolm about joining. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.